Oh my, haere mai. Welcome everybody to this elected members workshop on the Water Services Delivery Plan implementation. Today this meeting is being live streamed. Just like to remind everyone present in the room to have their phones turned on silent, and welcome everybody who may be watching online. Today we have with us Nick Davies from Martin Jenkins, who have been Martin Jenkins have been supporting the working group with technical support and inputs that will lead to the report that comes out at the end of this process. We also have our staff team here today. We've got Craig Tiriana, who's the Program Manager. We've got Stavros Michaels, GM of Infrastructure, and Russell George as well, who's part of the Waters team. So without further ado, I'd just like to ask Councillor Timera Benfeld to start us off with a karakia, please.
Kia ora tātou, anei tō tātou karakia whakatuwhera I tēnei ata. Kia hiri tātou. Tukua te wairua ke rereki nā taumata hei arahi I a tātou mahi katoa, me tā tātou whai nā tika nā rātou mā, kia mau, kia kaha, kia korai anaro, kia pūpuri, kia whakamaua, kia tīna, haumie, huie, tāe, kie.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll just note that Councillor Brown is online. Is he? Yeah. Can you hear us, Councillor Brown?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Right, I'll just briefly update where we are today. The last elected members workshop we had was on the 11th of March, you'll probably remember that, and we explained how we got to that point at that stage and overviewed the council decisions to get to the working group. This update will take you the next steps from March, and you've been provided with all the information from both the April working group meeting and also the most recent one that was only a few days ago. So this presentation covers mostly the April information, but Craig will overview where we're at in the process. So I'll hand over to Craig now and he can take over, or Stavros, whoever would like to start. I'll hand over to you.
Morena tata katoa, just thank you, Madam Chair. Just very, very briefly, it's quite important that as we progress through the development of a decision-making package for Council eventually, that all elected members are constantly remaining familiar and informed about the outcomes of various workshops and working parties that are taking place, together with our regional partners. So when the time comes for a decision-making that, all elected members are intimately familiar with the backgrounds, the findings, the technical investigations, the governance potential investigations, so the decision-making would be as informed as possible. And nothing else more to add other than to progress with the presentation at this point in time, and officers will take any questions arising from that presentation. So thank you very much.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Good morning, councillors and my colleagues across the way there. It's actually been a really busy time in the working group across the last, I think, March, April and May. You're seeing that in this presentation today, what we want to shine some light on is the technical inputs which are starting to go in to create this robust report that will support you with your decision making later in the year. Nick will largely handle the technical slides as we go through, and as Stavros said, there'll be some bits and pieces in here which will be emphasised by some of our other colleagues. Michelle's there from our Te Amarangi team who can talk about where we're up to with iwi engagement. We've got a little bit at the end of the pack about some of the comms that's been ongoing, but largely we're into looking at the filling that's the program started, as you know, officially back in November following the Water Service Delivery Plan being approved by government. And we had a Water Service Delivery Plan which we're now giving in effect through this work. The big deliverable, which we're being monitored on, is to come up with this report that Stavros just outlined that will look at a future proposition for Rotorua Water Service Delivery. And we also, through that, we've got we signed a heads of agreement with the Whakatane, Opotiki and Kawerau councils to do this work to look in what is a multi-council joint CCO. What could it be? What are the options? So this this is going to start off on that. Some of this background you do know well, but I realise that every time we talk, we're talking to our community who are listening, so it's always good just to step back a little bit before we jump forward. And I know that this will be interesting to a lot of people, not just in the room, but as we go through the rest of this journey for the rest of the year, it'll be of interest to everyone. I'm just trying to make this work, Gormati. Good. Sort of covered the purpose and a little bit of the background. What we'll also go across today is a bit of the timeline, which you've seen before. We've got a bit more depth on the timeline slide than previously. The technical subjects. You saw the strategic assessment in its origins back in March. This is where it's landed. The financial modelling has been presented, talked through, and I think in the pack we would have only sent out 2 nights ago, it actually moved it into a 30-year picture of the financials, so that work's evolved quite a lot in the 3 months since we spoke. And also there's the stormwater discussion today. I think we've probably covered most of this, is that it's going to cover the technical evidence that's emerging and what decisions this evidence might be leading to. It's probably quite important to state there'll be probably wording in some of these slides that you might think it says a decision. It's not a decision of council, it's a decision of what the working group works on, it's a decision of what the program team is then to go away and put its efforts into. So some of the slides might have a word decision in it. It's not a decision of council, it is a decision as to what is being, what the majority of the resources are being spent on. And it will become clear as you see some of the slides. The timeline slide has been altered from earlier in the year. I'm hoping that you've all seen it in the pack. It's a little bit hard on the big screens here. But we're all aware that we set up the working group late last year. The heads of agreement was signed. We did some technical work around what is it, the study, what's it made up of, and we get some support in from Martin Jenkins, who are here. We had individual council workshops. At that same time, deeper in our organisations, we were starting to work collectively across the working group on regional engagement plan, but also our local ones. Regionally, everyone kept talking to their people, whatever their channels were that were already in place. Like here, we've got a website that's got the latest information all the time of what's going on, plus our social media. Iwi engagement started with some conversations. I think you'll recall there'd been some Iwi chairs discussions across even last year and into this year with various groups just at a high level about that this work was happening. And as I said, Michelle can give a bit more detail later into that. As Councillor Barker said, we're working across the March, April and May. The next slide will give a bit more depth. On one of the things that's obviously come up that you're very aware of is it's been added to the bottom of this slide is the Head Start proposals. Not that it counters this work. This work, we've got an agreement with government, we've got delivery plans, we're being monitored, we've got a whole lot of activity that's been that we have to deliver across this period. So there's no legislation in place for anything else, so we're still heading on with the journey that we started on here towards your decision making later in the year. And that's the only other thing that's really changed on this slide is previously the decision making for the final decision on a future water services option for Rotorua was looked at around February of next year. We think the way the program is running, and if we can keep hitting the deliverables and the work keeps, being on time, we think we can bring that forward into this side of the year. And so there's a hope that it might be coming to you earlier for decision making, maybe around that December period, which would allow particularly the smaller councils more resource to go towards their LTPs next year. Otherwise, with the way that time was, there was going to be some quite big constraints about having to almost set up two based on waters in or waters out. So it'll give them the chance to work on that a bit more purposefully. So there's the possibility of that coming forward. While it's moved there, it is. It's aspirational. It's not a definite that that's what it's going to be, and I think that's still subject for everything that moves in tune from here. This slide just probably gives a little bit more detail of just how things get to the working group. So something starts up normally as a thinking process of here's some information, some technical information that we think is relevant. It'll go to the working group from the project team, and the working group will discuss it, and as you see, some of them move into the next month, so something comes up as a draft, and then if you look across the draft financial analysis was created in April, talked about in May as well, and the final will hit us in the May-June period at the working group. The next two slides will give a little bit more of that as well. These are the actual outputs that will come out of the working groups. So we're right in the 2, 3 and 4 is where we're at, heading towards a draft report. And this is the bit here where what we're actually asking as a project team is actually some direction from the working group around some of those subjects. Say, for instance, if I look at April, we were looking at agreed for shortlisted options for further analysis. That'll come clear when it goes across the strategic case and high-level options assessments. Agreed preferred stormwater option, again, that'll show through in there as to what will be recommended. And then feedback on the draft financial and economic analysis, again, provide the guts for the financial analysis and the full report, which will get finalised over the next 2 meetings. So, hear that.
Just before you go on, Craig, I just wondered are you happy to take questions throughout this presentation?
Yes, absolutely. And Nick's in the same mode online, so if you have questions whenever, you just go through the chair in case we don't. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I see we have an already. Councillor Timothy Benfell.
Kia ora team, thank you for the presentation so far. Just a question around the comms and engagement. Does the working group, or I suppose does the councils as a group, is that a joint or integrated comms/engagement plan, or does each individual council have their own and it's not integrated across the wider group? What does that look like?
Yeah, I can explain that. So at the high level, it's integrated. So what we'll see out of this week's meeting, and I think what we've seen from the last one where Mayor Tapsell chaired, is there may be some release that goes out across the wider group representative of that view from the meeting and the chair. But what we also have happening locally is we have our own information that's going at any time. So what we've been trying to do in a communication space around this waters program is to keep the conversation bubbling that was there with the previous government's iteration of what it was. So we already had some established channels and listeners, so that we went from there to just keep people informed. It hasn't been a hard sell on anything, it's just been more of an awareness to let them know. So locally, yes, we have our own specific comms plans. Regionally, there's a sharing that goes on between the 4 councils. Our 4 communication leads attached to the program will talk to each other on a regular basis about what opportunities there are to share. But the large one is generally what the chair wants to say out of each of the working group meetings.
So just a supplementary question, if I can, through you, Madam Chair, is with those, particularly with the iwi engagement plans, is there some sort of not quality assurance, but is there some sort of process to ensure that across the board for the various regions, our iwi chairs across district boundaries are all getting the same information? I'm just cognizant, and why I ask the question is because we might have a preference of what type and how we give information, and the other councils do, and then so we might get around a joint table with all of our iwi chairs, which I imagine will come in the future, and then we might have different chairs who have different information available to them. So has there been some sort of process around that quality control of information?
I'll get Michelle to come in, but what you've sort of described as, yes, what it is each council has taken their own responsibility in that space to have those conversations, and Michelle can probably give some better depth right now about that. It's probably the right time.
Morena. Currently no integrated sort of engagement with iwi across districts other than the conversations iwi are having with each other. There's complexities with our engagement compared to others. So, for example, we've got joint consent holders, which is karamitakina, and so it's not PSG related like Whakatane. So Whakatane only talks through their PSGEs, whereas we have Māori Land Trusts, we have Māori Incorporations and PSGEs, and we've got wastewater treatment on gifted reserve, treatment plants on gifted reserves land. So it's a little bit more complex here, so the way we're engaging is very different to how they are. However, we've got engagement updates sent to iwi at a high level, but those are general comms updates as well, so it's not targeted. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just before we go on, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Just regarding the timeline, you were talking about bringing the decision back to December. The decision, is that going to be, yes, we're moving forward with this option, or is this the option we're going to go to the community with to get their feedback? And I'm talking the general community.
So probably just that slide back up. I think the best way to describe that, Councillor, is that's the final decision if it comes forward to December. So it would move from February into December if that's possible. The decision you will make about what gets consulted on is much earlier. It's around that final report stage. I think it's between September and October. After there's an individual council meeting on that process, it would look at what decision making you would want to do at that point, and it will be quite dependent on, I suppose, what's in the reports as to what the reports are and what is there. And there's also that window in there between August and September to sort out what engagement approach is needed then for the wider community to assist with that decision making into that point. So does that?
So September, October / is when we go out with consultation?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Second question, if I may. You touched on the Head Start and the 3 months that we have to go back to government with our hopes for that. Given that this format involves Eastern Bay councils and that we're talking with other councils, it just seems a little bit confusing that we're potentially going one path for the unitary authority concept, if we go that way, and then we're going down another path for partners that might not be involved in the unitary authority, when I gather the government's overall direction with where we're heading is to be more efficient. It just doesn't sound logical to be doing two things separately.
I'll just ask the CE to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. This has been a topic of much discussion, both in this working group but also around senior staff and I guess elected members and mayors across the motu as well. I guess the government's view on this is that having sorted out waters and put them into a professional governorship, either under CCOs or under councils that now have to follow a regulated water strategy and be subject to price quality regulation by the Commerce Commission and Tamata Arawai. It's actually more appropriate to now have a separate discussion around the rest of councils. Minister Bishop in his, or I probably shouldn't say that, but maybe what I'll say is the fortunate thing about the timelines is that if this council chooses to participate in Head Start, then the shape of that will be well known before your decision on what you consult with the public as your preferred option for waters, because end of August is when start of August, 9th of August is when you'd need to be submitting, this council would need to be submitting a Head Start proposal. If that decision has a bearing on what your recommendation is to the community about water services, then you have the time to take that into account. What you won't have is the decision from what you won't have is the decision from Cabinet on whether that proposal is accepted when you go out to the community, but you should have the decision on what Cabinet is accepted when you make your final decision in December. So the sequence, sorry, if you go back to the slide, maybe I'll just step out the sequence a little bit, but it's a really, really important question. Okay, so if we just step through it, here is where this council may choose to submit a Head Start proposal, the start of August. Here, so we'll know what we're submitting by then. We won't know what's accepted, but we'll know what we're submitting. Then 7 weeks later, this council will decide on what its preferred water services delivery options are, preferred but not final, and go out to the community and consult. By the time you get that feedback from the community, you should get a decision on whether the proposal you submitted there has been accepted or not. And therefore, by the time you make that final decision, you will know both the community feedback and the decision of the Head Start proposal, based on current policy announcements.
So just to confirm, end of August, or beginning of August, sorry, we have the proposal in to central government for our unitary authority / Head Start preferred option.
If this council chooses to, yes.
Correct. And then in September, it says their cabinet agrees proposals in principle.
That's what the policy announcement says, yes.
And at the same time, we have our pretty close to those meetings of deciding where we go with local water done well.
As a preferred option to the community, not as a final decision for this council.
So they merge there.
They do, and Councillor, just to add further complication to it, arguably 7th of November, when the central government elections happen, is also a potentially important date for how this all turns out.
Correct.
But to be fair, your final decision on water services will happen after that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thanks for the answers. I think we'll move on because we've got a bit of information to get through. I can just be mindful of time. Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to Nick here, but probably just some context for all the councillors. At the time when all of this information was fed into Martin Jenkins into their various models and things, it was information that was known that went through in our water services delivery plan. Some of it has been updated since, but there will be, probably I'll jump in at times, or Stavros might, to clarify a few things from a Rotorua sense. There'll be a few bits that it will be clear that it's a Rotorua position. And then there'll be some other bits where we might just need to add some clarity around some of the statements that are pulled out of what was a point in time back in, I think they were created in around October, September last year, is it right, Russell? So yeah, some things, particularly in the consenting world, and those things have moved since that was assessed. So Nick, are you welcome, and we're in your hands. Let me know when you want the slides to move, I can do that from here.
Thank you, Morena koutou. So yes, I've been leading the Martin Jenkins team that's been engaged to support Council's investigation into the alternative water services delivery models that were included as part of the Heads of Agreement that all four councils signed, and I'm aware that the background reports and materials that were provided through to the Waters Working Group have also been shared with you, and the materials that I'm going to present to you today are the same materials essentially that have been presented to that Waters Working Group. As Craig mentioned, happy to take questions along the way. I would just say that in terms of the work that we've been undertaking, we've been working very closely with Craig and Russell and a team of council officers from across the four councils. We've also been working with chief financial officers from all four councils, particularly when it comes to the financial modelling. And obviously Andrew and the CEs have been a key part of that sort of process as well. So, we are independent advisors conducting analysis, but when it comes to ensuring that we've got solid information underpinning the assessment, we've been working very closely with that group. So this material, in terms of the strategic assessment that I'm going to be presenting, the background report sets out really the strategic context for considering the options. It talks about the current legislative and regulatory context for water services delivery, which has obviously changed quite a bit. It provides an overview of council's water services and performance, and it highlights the key risks and challenges. It then steps through the options assessment, which we've considered against the set of strategic objectives that were developed by that council working group, and we've previously discussed those with you in an earlier workshop. And then it essentially lands on a recommended shortlist of options for more detailed consideration as part of the investigation. So I'll step that through with you now. We thought it was helpful just to start with a few facts and figures and a bit of an overview of what we're actually talking about in terms of the combined water services across the four councils. So altogether we're looking at
between 110,000 and 120,000 people, and between 40 and 46,000 connections, depending on which of the water services we're focused on. There are more than 20 separate schemes or networks for each of the water supply, wastewater and stormwater services, and combined assets totaling more than $2.4 billion across the four council areas, and that's in terms of replacement value, and encompasses all of the treatment plants, reservoirs, pump stations and pipes. As you'd expect, the assets are in a range of different conditions, reflecting their age and a number of scheme-specific attributes as well. That gives you an overall sense of what we're talking about. The next slide just breaks that down into each of the four districts. So as you can see, Rotorua represents between 60 and 66% of the combined population, and around the same proportions of connections. And all of the districts are proposing relatively low growth in connections over time, ranging between 4 to 10%. But as you can see, it's quite there are a lot of different assets, a lot of different networks and catchments, and a range of different populations being serviced by the assets. And I don't know, Craig, whether you want to add any colour when it comes to the Rotorua situation.
We'll just do it as the individual bits get up. There's probably a couple of contexts around our stormwater and also our consenting that we just probably need to refresh from where we have been.
Yeah. So the next slide just further
the
breaks
assets
down
that we're talking about for each of the council groups. So by drinking water, wastewater and stormwater, and distinguish between the sort of the above ground and the below ground assets. So a significant amount of infrastructure that needs to be maintained, in some cases upgraded to meet new standards, and extended over time to accommodate growth. In terms of the asset values, you can see there that Rotorua's replacement assets values are sitting at around 1.4 billion, which is around 56% by value of all of the assets across the combined service area. I would say that when it comes to asset valuations, They may not be directly comparable in the sense that different councils obtain valuations in some cases from different valuers and at different points in time, but that gives you an overall sense of what that looks like. This slide just shows the difference between the replacement value and what's on the books, and so a large gap between the replacement value and the current book value of the assets simply reflects that the assets in a number of cases due to their age are significantly depreciated. Also across the district you can see that over the next few years we're looking at some pretty high rates of investment driven in particular by Rotorua's upgrade programs before investment rates decline. But when you look out, and you'll see in the later report on the financial analysis, when you look at overall the CapEx that the four councils are planning to spend and think is required across the networks, you're looking at about $1.7 billion of investment over 30 years, which is around 70% of today's asset value. So a substantial proportion of the network and networks will need to be replaced over the next 30 years, according to those forecasts. And that's to be expected given when the infrastructure was put in place and the asset life cycles associated with this long-term infrastructure. In terms of the environmental compliance, this provides just a snapshot. And as Craig said, there's been some updates to this since we drew this information out of the water services delivery plans. The overall picture is mixed. While there's some non-compliance in relation to specific plants, overall, when it comes to drinking water, the situation is reasonably good. It's certainly not inconsistent with other regions. However, a major issue that you'll see there coming through the table is that across the four districts in combination, there is a major consent renewal program over the next decade, particularly for wastewater, with a number of old consents expected to drive significant upgrade requirements over the coming years. And that's even under the new wastewater environmental protection standards. So a significant amount of capital investment proposed to go into those wastewater treatment plants to bring them up to what will be those new regulatory requirements under the performance standards. Craig, do you want to add something here on the state of the Rotorua situation?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Stavros here. Look, I'll just a couple of corrections. Remember that some of this information was extracted from the Waters Delivery Plan back in July last year. When it comes to the Rotorua Lakes, water supply, the three expert concerns, relate to concerns for the Himo and Waiapa, water supplies. Those concerns are subject at the moment to cultural impact assessments by Tuhurangi and Whakaui, and obviously working with that iwi to secure that. The third one, which is the largest one, is Karamutekina, which a concern has been lodged now together jointly with Ngāti. So that is in progress. In terms of upcoming concerns, we've got the Rewa, and a couple of other areas that we're working with the relevant parties to progress those concerns. We don't anticipate any major issues with that, just a matter of process to make sure that the relevant cultural impact assessments are given an opportunity to be constructed by the relevant iwi to assist with that process. Wastewater, we actually have two wastewater treatment plants. We've got one in Rotoiti, Rotoma, that is fully consented for the next, things in this fifth year now. We've got another 30 years to go in this current consent. And as we all know, the Rotorua wastewater treatment plant, it's practically constructed by October this year, and we are now in the process of searching for the discharge point to consent it, so we are all aware where with that. Stormwater, the comprehensive stormwater consent was lodged, but that, was issued in October last year, so we've got the resource consent in place and working, to satisfy the condition of the consent for the next 35 years. As it's noted there is that the new consent requires obviously different management approaches and requirements, which again relate to the construction of 7 catchment management plans and obviously working with the relevant people, affected parties, to make sure that each catchment management plan complies with the terms and conditions of the resource consent. So there's nothing other than the wastewater treatment plant in the city that we're looking for the discharge point. The rest of them are work in progress or have been completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. I'll hand you back over to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, thanks. So in the accompanying report, and in particular in pages 6 to 25 of that report, we outline a strategic assessment. It's effectively looking across and drawing on the water services delivery plans, asset management plans of councils, an overall summary of the current state in terms of asset condition, drinking water compliance, environmental compliance, the network performance and
the capital program delivery, as well as the financial outlook. And this slide is a summary essentially of the key risks and challenges identified through that strategic assessment. And the core message really from this analysis is that the current service delivery model, to a greater or lesser extent across the individual councils, but really for all councils to some degree, carries real risk and growing risk. And I'll just step through that in a bit more detail. So starting with common challenges, because there are a lot of common challenges that all councils face. There are a number of issues that are likely to present as challenges over the coming period. So intensifying regulatory compliance costs, new wastewater standards, as I say, driving higher levels of regulatory requirements and associated capital investment. And on top of that, you have significant changes to the regulatory environment with quite detailed information disclosure requirements being applied by the Commerce Commission and the potential for increased economic regulation over time. All of the 4 councils face challenges in terms of infrastructure resilience, particularly in the face of climate change, but also significant natural hazard risk. And particularly in relation to climate change and increases in increased intensity of rainfall events and increased frequency of heavy rainfall events, that is also expected to drive, particularly for the stormwater network capacity investment requirements over time, as well as presenting some resilience issues for wastewater networks as well. We're anticipating significant future workforce pressures. I mean, across the nation, this is an industry that has an ageing workforce, and particularly with the establishment of new water services organisations, including in neighbouring regions, we're anticipating and in fact already seeing in different parts of the country significant challenges with the attraction and retention of skilled staff. And that is likely to get more intense as those new water services organisations are established and are competing effectively for the same talent pool. We're also seeing constrained ability across the 4 councils to deliver large capital programs, and whilst the performance varies across those council groups, all councils have struggled to consistently deliver their full capital programs, which can lead to higher reactive maintenance costs and declining asset condition in some cases. All 4 councils are facing the same challenges as every other council in New Zealand around the rising costs and supply chain constraints. And one thing that obviously we're expecting is that, in this region, you're not alone in projecting sort of higher rates of capital investment over time. That's an industry-wide issue, and that is likely to put significant pressure on supply chains and potentially flowing through into costs of delivery. So really important going into that to be as efficient as we can around asset management, procurement, supply chain management. All 4 councils similarly are facing the prospect of increases in water charges as a percentage of median household income, with particularly acute challenges in Whakatane and Inapotiki. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, and I won't necessarily go blow by blow through this, each individual district faces its own unique challenges and council-specific pressures as well. So I might just pause there in case you want to add anything to that in terms of Rotorua specifically.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Just a couple of clarifications with regards to Rotorua Lakes environment. When the bullet point 1 says limited asset condition and information of stormwater network, that should read limited capacity of our stormwater system, as we presented to elected members a number of times. We do have a network that's been designed for a particular flow capacity, but obviously with the weather changes, the new standards and regulations, that capacity needs to increase. And yes, you're aware of how our stormwater master plan that is being given effect right now to address that issue is not about the condition of the pipes, it's just the capacity of the pipes and working through that. Expiring water concerns may not be renewed at current volumes. We no longer have that concern. Taniwha Springs was concerned that the volumes designed for 35 years. Rewa will be the same. Karamutekina could provide 60% of our water supply has been applied for a concern for the same levels in collaboration with Hapu and Atikia. Himo and Waiapa, we will apply for the same level of take because that take only represents less than 3% of the dry water flow in the Puarenga stream, so we don't expect to see any significant opposition to that. And obviously with a new comprehensive stormwater concern compliance cost, it is true that we will be facing a significant compliance cost because traditionally managing stormwater was all about managing the flows and the volumes of water. New concerns requires us to manage the quality of stormwater, and we very cognizant of that, and obviously you have included that into our forward infrastructure strategy, and we are addressing it as we go along. Water metering, I think, is a subject matter that this council has never discussed, and obviously this is a matter for future consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. And just before we move on, I'll take a question from Councillor Okawa-Tate.
Yes, thank you. Stavros, with the new consents, and I see where there'll be higher monitoring and more compliance costs, do you see at some stage the existing consents that we've got, do you think that you'll have to then sort of apply that to the existing ones as well? Not just the new consents?
Thank you, Councillor Okawa-Tate. Yes, as new consents are coming into force, in general, there is a better awareness, of not just quantities of water we take, but also the effects downstream and upstream. And yes, anticipation in general terms is that we can expect different conditions, but also a more collaborative approach, to managing those conditions of the concerns. And we're quite, ready for that. As I said, we've got joint concerns with Hapu and, and Ngāti Waewae, Ngāti Kia. We're working with, on Ngāti Whakaui for the Hiwaiwapa area. Yes, the answer is yes. There will be different types of considerations to be addressed as new concerns come into effect.
Thank you. And one more question from Councillor Kaifong, Deputy Mayor Kaifong.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that presentation there, it says that no metering planned may be a future requirement. Do we have any idea of how certain that may or may not need to happen, given that we're about to start an LTP process, and if we do need to be setting aside funding for whatever that is in terms of implementation or putting them in, or?
I'm not, thank you, Deputy Mayor Kaifong. Metering it's a tool to achieve something. I'm not aware of any specific requirements or the new regulations that communities should be metered. It's a methodology of assigning costs to the users. We know roughly that if we were to meter our urban and currently unmetered areas, it costs us somewhere between $15 and $20 million. We haven't considered that in serious terms, and I don't think there's any regulatory requirement for us to meter. Maybe in the future might be different approaches, but at the moment it's not in our horizon.
Thank you. No further questions, so I'll back over to you, Nick.
Thank you. So, the key point, I guess, of this slide is not simply to say that these challenges don't disappear under.
Some models, some service delivery models are better equipped to manage them than others, and so this provides a lens over which we consider those different alternative service delivery models as reflected in the strategic assessment report. Next slide.
Deputy Mayor. Perhaps this is one of the reasons you've highlighted it, is in the past, and this is just to understand that regardless of what Council's decision around whether you enter a CCO or not, we're entering a very different environment around delivery of water services. In the past, the regulatory approach was relatively light, and so Council could make a business case decision, as Mr. Michaels has indicated, to say $20 million cost doesn't benefit because we're not going to do any deferred capital investment. Our marginal cost of water is very low, so it doesn't make a business case sense, and that could be a Council decision. In the future, and maybe Nick, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong, there is the opportunity for both Taumata Arawai and the Commerce Commission to perhaps view that differently and maybe have requirements that don't arise from just the natural business case that is the way we've operated in the past. If that's broadly right, then probably nothing to add, but if it's broadly wrong, maybe you want to correct me, Nick? Thanks.
No, it's probably right, but I think it's a really important point to emphasise, Andrew. So, the entire statutory framework for the delivery of water services has changed with the passage of the Local Government Water Services Act, and regardless of whether, as you say, the Council were to choose to establish a water services CCO or not, there are a number of significant changes coming to the planning, reporting, accountability arrangements and additional regulations. So, for example, water activities, planning, strategy, you currently do that through your long-term planning process. That will move out of your long-term plan and into a new planning and accountability document called a water services strategy. There are quite significantly different requirements around that, including the need to report financially separately for water activities and have separate water audits of financial performance. And as I mentioned, the Commerce Commission has already passed a determination around information disclosure and will start to collect a significantly greater level of information from all water services providers, whether they're councils or water companies, that will have drive compliance costs, but are also likely to potentially lead to additional future requirements in the future. So the model we're moving into is much more like what is in place for electricity distribution businesses and gas companies, regulated natural monopolies, than you're normally used to operating under the Local Government Act and the usual long-term planning processes.
Thank you, Nick. I've got one more question from Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. So just carrying on from Deputy Mayor Kai Fong's question and the comments made by the CE, can I just ask Does Whakatane, Kawerau or Poriki currently have water meters?
Do you have an answer to that, Nick?
I just missed the end of the conversation. Do they have what, sorry?
Water meters.
I don't believe any of the councils universally have water meters. There may be some metering of particular segments of customers. I'd need to come back to you with a detailed answer on that, but not universally, no.
Okay.
For clarification, Councillor Patterson, we have about 5,000 water meters, rural and commercial premises. So.
Yes, no, I know that. But as far as the urban metering goes, to our best knowledge, no. So I note the comment there may be a future requirement, which I think the CE touched on, and I think you may have also touched on, Nick, that down the track it may. But when is down the track? Because how can we, this is a technical discussion, I gather, how can we actually fairly do an assessment of accounts, etc., unless you measure it? How do we measure this?
I'll try and give you a short answer because I think you're coming to this in due course. There are, if I understand correctly, your questions around charging different customers differently, potentially. Fundamentally, there's two models that you'll see coming up in these slides, which are either around a harmonised pricing
I saw that.
or cost to serve.
Yep.
Both options can be delivered with water meters and both options can be delivered without water meters. So there are different ways of implementing either model. Okay,
so what you're saying is that we're not going to get a surprise at some point, whereas Mr. Michaels pointed out that it's a $20 million investment proposed for Rotorua or possible for Rotorua down the track. And when you add that into the other three councils, we could be looking at $80 million. Or, if this is done in 10 years' time, that's a significant investment, and it's got to be user pays, surely.
I guess the short answer to that is that circumstance would be no different if you entered a CCO or not. So I guess that's a kind of, since we're talking about it, it's important that you know about it, but it's not, I don't believe it's relevant to the decision that you're going to be facing around whether you enter a CCO or not, because that's a function of what the regulator does to you. The regulator is going to do that whether you're in a CCO or in-house business unit. So.
No, the reason I ask is that somebody has to pay, and it's usually the ratepayer. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to add to the discussion, so the comment that was, I think, made earlier, which is there is currently no mandating of metering by the regulator. A number of the multi-council water companies that are being established are proposing significant investments in metering programs, but that is because there might be water security issues in the region, or there may be a view that in terms of a volumetric component to charging may create the right incentives for customers to conserve water and therefore reduce the costs on the network. And I think ultimately how the Commerce Commission would view this is that they're not going to impose something that delivers higher costs for customers without there being benefits delivered by that. And at the moment, as I say, there's nothing in the legislation that requires metering. So Andrew's quite right. This is a decision that will, ultimately be considered either by council or by a board, but would be subject to the usual sorts of assessments around is there a return on this investment or not.
Thank you. I think we'll move on, Nick. We've got a bit ahead of us yet, so I'll leave it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So to assess the options, the Waters Working Group agreed 7 strategic objectives, and these are the lens through which we've assessed the different delivery models. Those objectives relate to financial sustainability, public health and environmental performance, infrastructure resilience, integrated planning, and that's considering obviously planning vis-a-vis transport and other functions, affordability, and valuing and honouring obligations to Hapu and Iwi, and finally mitigating the impact on remaining council operations. So you'll see in our report there's some quite detailed tables where we've stepped through an assessment of the options against those. I think we've covered the options previously, but just very briefly, option one is your current service delivery model, so in-house business unit. As Andrew said, that there are significant changes to the environment within which that operates, but from a delivery sense, that's essentially what you've got now. The other two options that have been considered are an asset-owning water services CCO, so this is where councils would jointly establish a company and transfer responsibility, assets and water-related debt across to that new organisation, which would then be responsible for delivering the services, including determining investment and decisions around the setting of water charges. And then option three is effectively, you think of this as a sort of a variant of option one. The councils would retain responsibility, but would set up a company effectively to contract service delivery or certain aspects of service delivery. But unless the assets and responsibility are transferred, then effectively that is a subcontracting arrangement under the status quo. So those are the options that we looked at. And then in terms of the conclusions from the assessment, there's a lot more detail in the background report on pages 26 to 39, but this slide succinctly summarises the key advantages and disadvantages of each model, and essentially the conclusion of that strategic assessment is that two of the options deserve further investigation, and one, our recommendation was one does not, being the service delivery only water organisation, and we stepped the Waters Working Group through this. So in terms of a brief summary, option one, in-house model, when this model is clearly working, at least for now. The key issue with this model relates to its limited ability to cope with the long-term issues and challenges we highlighted earlier. However, we've recommended that this option stay on the table as it reflects the existing service delivery model and provides a useful basis for comparing the alternatives. And of course, all four councils have currently got a water services delivery plan in place, approved by DIA for the next 10 years. This option includes, the benefits of this option include ease of implementation, maintaining integration with existing council functions, and does not give rise to issues around stranded costs. But as I said, the long-term picture it includes affordability pressures, inability to obtain those scale economies that evidence suggests are possible under a multi-council CCO, and workforce risks that will worsen if neighbouring regions form larger entities. So viable in the short term, but will face increasing challenges to remain sustainable in the longer term. Option two, based on our analysis, offers the greatest long-term potential, but also has potential disadvantages and risks that would need to be mitigated through careful design and implementation. So that model offers scale efficiencies, access to LGFA borrowing on terms that are more suitable for a water utility, would remove water debt from council balance sheets and free up headroom for other services, would have greater capacity to undertake investment compared with the current model, and therefore has advantages in terms of regulatory compliance, infrastructure resilience and service standards, and it's more likely to be able to cope better with the workforce challenges through providing for the ability to aggregate critical workforce capabilities. So there'd still be a lot of design work to do to flesh out that option, including in relation to the ownership, representation and governance arrangements. And that's work we've started to work through with the Waters Working Group. And I understand you've received an initial paper on that as part of the background reading as well. But that that option is one that we believe should be subject to that further investigation. Option 3, the service delivery only water services CCO, we recommended that be discontinued or dropped from the shortlist. There are probably 4 actually fundamental issues with that model in our assessment. Firstly, it offers no financing advantage, so the debt stays with councils, the borrowing limits are unchanged, and the core financial challenge is therefore unaddressed through this option, and councils remain responsible for and sort of bear all of the risks associated with that future investment. We also assess this model to be more fragmented and potentially lead to confusing accountabilities. So the water company would be responsible for delivering services but have no control over the investment levels or the pricing decisions. So those would remain with the 4 separate councils. And as we've seen in other parts of the country, that can be a recipe for blame shifting. We have also seen over the years that this model can lead to a disconnect effectively between the investment that is required by the network and the funding and financing decisions that remain at arm's length from those managing the assets. We also assess this model as likely to lead to fragmented customer engagement. So with decision making split between councils and the water company, there could be confusion around who is responsible for what and multiple interfaces there. There may be some scope for operating and capital efficiencies associated with this model and also better scope for managing workforce risks. But in our assessment, those benefits are likely to be outweighed by the disadvantages of the model. So we recommended discontinuing further consideration of that, and that recommendation was supported by the Waters Working Group. Any questions?
There appear to be no questions at this stage, Nick, so we'll just move on to the next section, which I believe is stormwater. If we just do a high-level run through of this one, it would be good. Thank you.
So the question we're exploring here is whether, if a water services CCO was to be established, whether stormwater should transfer along with drinking water and wastewater, or whether stormwater should remain with the council. Next slide, thanks. So I guess the first question is, why are we talking about stormwater separately? And the reason fundamentally is because the issues are quite different from drinking water and wastewater, which are closed networks. Stormwater, on the other hand, is an open network. Stormwater flows not only along pipes and culverts, but across roads, through parks and streams and on private land. Through many of the assets involved include road corridors, detention ponds, open spaces, so they're multi-purpose in nature and owned by different parties. And this means stormwater management is inherently a land use system challenge, not just a pipes and pumps challenge. It also has strong public good characteristics, so the benefits of good stormwater management, which include flood protection and water quality, are shared across whole communities rather than simply by those who are connected to or in immediate proximity to the network. And that's why, as well, it's typically funded differently from drinking water and wastewater, with a larger component of sort of general rates funding usually, and it's helpful to explain these differences in terms of why this choice is not quite as straightforward as it is for drinking water and wastewater. The next slide just illustrates the coordination challenge that sits at the heart of stormwater management. So alongside the territorial authority, you also have interactions with NZTA around state, the National Roading Network. Regional councils interface in terms of catchment management, flood protection, and private landowners. And so if you introduce a new water services organisation, that adds another party into that mix. Any model in relation to stormwater will need to have a coordination element between those multiple parties. So that's unavoidable. So the question's not whether you solve the coordination problem, but whether your model makes it harder or easier. Right now, each of the councils delivers all of the stormwater services that could potentially move to a joint organisation, with the exception, obviously, of those private properties. So you're already managing the system. The decision really is around whether you keep doing that alongside a new water organisation, or whether you look to bring it all together with responsibility for all of the critical related functions and capabilities associated with the three waters under one roof. Next slide, thanks. In terms of the legislative framework, it provides councils with genuine flexibility and choice, so you can retain stormwater, contract it out or transfer it. Councils under any option will retain overall accountability for stormwater regardless of what model is chosen, and that's because it's not just, as I mentioned, about the management of the engineered infrastructure. It's also about land use planning and other functions that councils would retain. There are a number of important considerations that should have influenced the decision here. First, if the council were to retain responsibility for stormwater, there will be two regulated water services providers in each district. So there'd be the council for stormwater and the new water company for drinking water and wastewater. And that would inevitably mean some duplication of planning, reporting, financial audit, as well as regulatory compliance obligations. And there would be real costs associated with that duplication. Secondly, water organisations face different rules for charging for stormwater than councils do. And under a CCO model, after 5 years, councils would not be able to charge based on property value. It has to move to a zone-based charging system under the legislation, and that transition will require careful design in order to ensure that's done well. And thirdly, there are practical considerations, including the ability to maintain the required skills and expertise to manage stormwater if water staff transferred to a new organisation, and that's a particularly significant concern for smaller councils in terms of being able to retain those capabilities. And in practice, if three waters are managed together through the water teams, working out which staff transfer and which don't could be quite problematic in relation to this. So what is useful also just to include a picture of what's happening across New Zealand. Of all of the councils that have selected multi-council water companies, 27 have chosen a three waters model, and these include Tauranga Western Bay, Hawke's Bay, Te Aki Wai and Wellington, and 11 have gone with the two waters model with a sort of a contract arrangement in place, and that includes, for example, Waikato Waters. So there are different models out there. The councils have weighed, the same trade-offs that you'll be asked to consider, and the majority have concluded that integrated three waters delivery is the stronger long-term model, and there's probably two different groupings in that regard. There are those urban areas that are, including the faster growing ones, where stormwater provision is a major component of enabling housing development. They've tended to go with three waters models because of the balance sheet sort of implications. And at the other end of the spectrum, where you've had very small councils that would struggle to maintain service provision, they've also tended to favour three waters as well.
Thank you. Nick, can I just pause for a moment, and the CE wants to make a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is an appropriate time to start turning our minds to how a potential change to a unitary authority comes to this decision. I know this came up at the working group earlier in the week, because potentially as a territorial authority, obviously we don't own flood protection and other assets that in some way relate to stormwater management, but because of the way TAs and regional councils have divided responsibilities, they sit in two different organisations. If one or all of the shareholding councils were to be a unitary authority with the ownership of all of those flood protection assets, there is a question about whether all of those assets would also better sit in a CCO so that stormwater and flood protection could be managed in an integrated manner. And there's a number of the advantages that apply to stormwater being in a CCO potentially also apply to flood protection assets being in a CCO. So it's kind of quite early days for us to think about that. I believe the legislation doesn't allow at this point for those those flood protection assets to be within a CCO, because when this legislation was passed, it was with the understanding that water services CCOs will be born out of territorial authorities which don't have flood protection assets, and therefore it wasn't necessarily contemplated. However, it's one certainly I'm starting to think about, and what some of these downstream decisions might be. Nick, I don't know if you have anything to add, or if you've had a thought about, so last time I brought this up 4 days ago.
No, nothing further to add at this stage, but I thought that was a good summary, Andrew.
Any questions before? Yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I guess this is through a governance question. At the beginning of our council meeting the other day, or should I say prior to, we had a presentation by Te Arawa talking about their concerns regarding the discharge point for the wastewater treatment plant. My question is, that was possible because we are currently responsible for that as the governors of this community. They came and shared their views with us. My question is, would they have the same option to do that with a completely separate entity and in a manner where they could potentially influence any decisions made by that entity?
Thank you, Councillor. I might just hand this to the CE in the first instance.
Yeah, this is a good one. So Councillor, if I just step back to my earlier comment about us entering a very different space in terms of water delivery, a number of laws were passed by government. They are now laws of the land that govern water services, and they are very different from how this was done in the past. They contain, obviously, the provisions for a price quality regulator, and the level of disclosure to begin with, but then supervision and potentially intervention powers are starting to be developed. The reason I say that is obviously this council or any future council will always have some democratic openness and accountability for people to share their views. However, sharing their views and translate into decision making is governed by laws. And at this point, whether you're in a CCO or not, the laws that govern decision making around water are changing. For example, and we'll bring this to you when we bring that particular topic to you, is what the laws of New Zealand now state around decision making around water. They are different, and we're moving into a different space. And so I don't know if Nick's nodding very cautiously, so I think tells me that I haven't said anything wildly wrong, but I just want to distinguish between people having a voice and then how the decision-making body, whether it's a council or the board of CCO or the shareholder forum that looks after the board of a CCO might make decisions, are increasingly regulated and increasingly standardised.
Thank you. And oh, sorry, Nick. I'll just, after you've had something to say, I've just got another question for you. So go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to add a couple of points to Andrew's points. So one is there are a couple of critical documents, accountability documents that are provided for in the legislation that would enable councils to influence or set requirements for the way that the company is required to engage with iwi hapu, for example. So through the transfer agreement, if council has any particular statutory obligations or responsibilities in relation to under the treaty settlements, for example, then they can be passed on effectively, expressly through those agreements. And then secondly, there's a statement of expectations which all shareholding councils in a water organisation must provide to the board, and that is binding on the company, and through that there is provision to set expectations around the nature of engagement in relation to things like discharges and consenting processes, but also in terms of investment prioritisation and other matters. So you do have a number of levers at your disposal to influence those sorts of outcomes.
Thank you, Nick. Any further questions there, Councillor?
I guess it kind of answered my question, but my real question was, would they have the opportunity to sit down in a forum with the board and discuss openly like they did with us the other day? Could they do that or not?
The answer is yes, they could do that. How the board then makes its decision.
Well, that's the same with us. We listen and then we decide.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the same. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timura Benfell has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, if I can make a comment, if that's all right with you. I just think we thank you for the questions, Councillor Patterson. I think they're really, really important, and I think when we invite our delegates and representatives of Te Arawa here to the room, it is important to take on some of those messages. One of the key messages were that it was a reinforcement that Te Arawa are not just people who come into the room to be heard. They are our PSGs, they are our treaty partners, they are mana whenua landowners and joint consent holders. And so I think in our languaging and in our opinions around how we engage with that, it's really, really important that we get some of those distinctions correct, because I think we do get into a position where we appear to have the position that Te Arawa are just any other Joe blogs, where, certainly from my perspective, I'm sure members around the table share the perspective, they're certainly not just Joe blogs off the street, that they are valued treaty partners, valued joint consent holders, valued PSGs, in this process and every other process that this council undertakes. So that's just the comment that I wanted to make regarding some of the answers that were provided. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And I would like to note also that there's been a significant amount of work done by the staff around this particular topic, because we are aware of how complex our operating environment is, and we want to hear these views and we want to reflect them in our work. So the team at the Te Aomarangi have done an engagement plan for this particular topic, which you have had a copy of to see where the direction of travel is, but I'm sure that will evolve over time and will be reflected in the arrangements of any potential CCO as well. But note your comments. Thank you.
And just to support that as well, I suppose there is a differentiation between how what the law sets as a bar and to how we set our policy and how we set our expectations of our CCOs as well, because quite frankly some of those laws are quite a very low bar. And I'm sure that's not the standard of operating that we want to maintain. We want to go to enact that, be lawful, but also abide by our obligations to our treaty partners. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on now, Nick. We'll just whip through these next few slides and progress on, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, thank you. So, in a similar vein to the table the picture we presented earlier for all three waters, there are a number of common risks and challenges facing the group of councils in relation to stormwater and some specific individual ones. So, in the interest of time, I won't delve into these in great detail unless there are specific questions. But the long and the short of it is that a two waters model would leave each council continuing to carry some pretty significant risks with more constrained balance sheets and thinner workforce and competing priorities. So at the conclusion of our assessment, we are sort of recommended a three waters option, but I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. In terms of the options, so yeah, as I said before, option one's stormwater would stay with council. I think it's really important to note that for all of these options, what we're essentially talking about is the potential transfer of engineered infrastructure assets and asset management and capital delivery functions across to the water organisation. We're not proposing under any of these options that mixed-use land, for example, park detention ponds on parks and reserves, would transfer. They would remain with the council. So all of that shared infrastructure, including land that might be used for recreational purposes, would remain in the ownership and of council and the management as well, unless you wanted to contract out certain aspects of management to the CCO. So I think that's an important distinction. And I think I covered these options pretty earlier in the presentation, so we can just probably move on to the final slide. So this essentially summarises the result of our assessment. As I mentioned, with option one, it looks like a reasonable place to start. It, however, would, under the new environment, duplicate regulatory obligations, would result in two water services providers in the district, would leave stormwater debt on council balance sheets and therefore competing with roads and housing and other community services, and would create, in our view, real risks for workforce attraction when staff are competing with water services organisations. So some concerns in terms of long-term sustainability of that model. Option two being council remaining responsible but contracting out service delivery would give you some operational benefits, but does give rise to that split accountability problem, particularly when planning, investment and pricing sit with the council and delivery sits with the water organisation. And crucially, the stormwater debt would continue to sit on council's balance sheets, so you don't have the financing advantages associated with that model. Thirdly, option three, that's the full transfer. That is the recommended option based on our assessment, would give the water company access to significantly greater borrowing capacity, meaning stormwater investment required to protect communities, including in the face of climate change and greater pressure on those networks, would be possible, with the costs able to be better spread across generations as well. So the modelling that we've done indicates that a three waters organisation would produce the lowest average charge per connection across all four districts over the forecast period, and the transfer of stormwater debt would also improve council balance sheets and create greater financial resilience. So that is the recommendation, and that was also supported by the Waters Working Group at the meeting earlier this week.
Thank you, Nick. We'll just see there's a question from Councillor Patterson.
A very quick yes or no answer. So that recommendation applies to whichever model we choose to go forward with, being an internal business unit or a water services CCO.
That's correct. So yeah, we're saying, effectively saying that under option one, which is council continues to manage in-house, that would be three waters as it is today. And in terms of the principal option that we're recommending comparing that to, which is the water company's option, that would be a three waters option.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I don't think there appears to be any. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, thanks Nick, which is the financial modelling. Yeah,
thank you. So perhaps start with the first slide. So, firstly, the starting point, the financial framework that we're using here is the same financial framework that rests within the Local Government Water Services Act in terms of financial sustainability, and which also was used by the Department of Internal Affairs when assessing water services delivery plans. So there are a number of components of financial sustainability. Firstly, there's a question around revenue sufficiency. So is the projected revenue sufficient to cover all of the costs of delivering water services, including the operating costs, but also the costs associated with meeting the obligations under borrowing and servicing the debt. The second question relates to investment sufficiency, and this is where the regulatory requirements come in. So that's really looking at the sufficiency of the capital program and asking whether there's sufficient provision to maintain assets and keep them in good condition, meet regulatory requirements, including any upgrades that are required to maintain compliance with public health and resource consent requirements, as well as being adequate to meet the requirements for growth. And the third element is financing sufficiency, and that is really looking at can the council or the water organisation actually raise the borrowing required to finance the investment whilst remaining within prudential financial limits. So those are the three legs of the financial sustainability requirements, and in addition to that we consider resource sufficiency, which also looks at, for example, ability to deliver capital, but also the scope for efficiencies, and then affordability, which is how those revenues translate into water charges for individual customers, and what that looks like both over time and as a percentage of median household income. So our model supports that analysis, and the reports that you have seen effectively apply that lens. Next slide, thanks. Effectively what we do is we have taken the council supplied inputs in terms of operating costs, capital investment projections. These are the same numbers that were included in water services delivery plans and submitted through to the Department of Internal Affairs. In addition to that, we've agreed assumptions with CFOs around things like interest rates, inflation, etc., for the purposes of modelling and the approach to financing. And then what the modelling does is effectively it generates financial scenarios for each of the options that allows the alternative delivery models to be compared in terms of what that looks like for revenue, costs, borrowing and affordability. Next slide, thanks. In terms of the scenarios that we've looked at, on the left-hand side, that's simply the status quo. So all we've done there is simply aggregate each council's existing financial projections. We haven't assumed any efficiency gains, and that is the benchmark against which the other scenarios are compared. The scenarios 1 and 2 can be thought of as bookends. So effectively what they do is they ask, with scenario 1 asks the question, if we take council's current revenue projections as a given, how much more investment could you potentially do under a water services company, recognising the greater capacity to invest from a financial perspective, but also from an efficiency perspective. And scenario 2 is the opposite end of that sort of that bookend, which is what if you were to just simply look to fund the current OPEX and CAPEX projections at least cost, by how much could you reduce the price to customers, again reflecting the scope for more optimised financing arrangements and greater scope for efficiency. The reality is that in practice a water organisation may deliver a combination of both increased investment and lower prices relative to the status quo, but this just gives you a sense of what is possible. Next slide, thanks. So as I said, we've worked through the assumptions with CFOs. like all modelling, the results are a function of the assumptions made. These have been tested, and these are very similar to modelling that has been used kind of throughout the country. We've assumed an establishment date for a new water company of the 1st of July 2028. That's just a modelling assumption. We've also assumed operating efficiencies of 0.75% per annum that would begin 2 years post-establishment and then increase on a compounding basis over the next 15 years. And similarly with capital efficiencies, we've assumed 1.2% per annum, compounding to about 18% over 15 years, and then no further efficiencies beyond that. In terms of the basis for those assumptions, what we've effectively done is that we've looked at regulated water services providers in similar jurisdictions. So this was quite a controversial topic during the Three Waters reforms, and in particular the reforms made reference to experience in the UK with particularly large-scale entities. What we've done is look closer to home. So we've looked at a number of Australian states. If you take Victoria, for example, there are 19 regional water authorities there, a number of which are far more similar to what we're talking about here, both in terms of the urban density and the population size and the number of networks. So that these assumptions are made with reference to what has actually been achieved and delivered by regulated water authorities. We've made some assumptions around establishment costs. They are ballpark at this stage. What I would say about, sorry, if you can just go back one slide. What I would say about those is that there's a range of different costs out there, and these need to be kind of worked through in more detail. There are, for example, Waikato Waters is spending, I think, 18 million on its establishment. The important thing to point out here is that in terms of the modelling results, they are not sensitive to this particular assumption. So, we're talking about many, billions of dollars of capital, and similarly in terms of operating costs being spent over the next 30 years. And this number effectively would get added to the debt that would transfer to the water company. So it has a very, very small impact basically on the overall results. We've also assumed some incremental operating costs associated with the new requirements. This model requires boards, for example, and therefore directors' fees. So we've made sure we've included some allowance for that, and also just assumed the current LGFA financing rate.
Before you move on, Nick, just with the question around that financing rate. Obviously, when councils join together as a water services CCO, they get a greater capacity for borrowing. And do they also get better interest rates and other benefits as well?
So, unlikely. And the reason for that is that the predominant financing source for new water organisations is the same as the predominant financing source for councils, being the local government funding agency. And what LGFA have said is that they're prepared to lend, under different financing covenants, so to a higher level of gearing, but effectively at the same interest rate that councils are paying. So that is reflective of the current LGFA policy. So no margin, but effectively the same rate.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because that's significant in the conversation. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Yes, just one from Councillor Maxwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just asking, the 9 million, is that for the total of the 4 entities we're in with?
The question was, did you get that, Nick?
Yeah, that's correct. So we've assumed that's associated with the 4 council model. So, for example, if only 3 of the councils chose, then that would reduce. And we are modelling some alternative scenarios that adjust that. But as I say, it doesn't really make a massive difference to any of the results.
Thank you. And a question from Councillor Timera Benfell.
I'm not sure if it's this far in the plan yet, but in terms of the governance structure of the CCO, does each council or district get a proportional level of governance, or is it more just nationally whoever applies for those roles, or has any thought been given to the distribution of that governance roles?
I might just leave that perhaps with Craig here.
Thank you for that. So as we go through this process, that will materialise. So the actual ownership, shareholdings and those sort of things are part of what's being discussed now. So the bottom line is that it can be a whole lot of things, is what will be showed in evidence from around the country, is how they've particularly attached to that. But there'll be some further slides through, or actually I think it's in the reading that came to you yesterday or the night before, which will come up at the next one as to where we land. But yeah.
Maybe I can just, it's important to distinguish between the shareholder forum and the board. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the board of directors would not typically have seats allocated to territorial authorities or locations. It's the shareholder forum that might have that, and that's also, I think, in the models that we'll come to later on in the reading, is that's where we've seen iwi have a strong presence, is in that shareholder forum.
That's correct, Andrew, and under the legislation, actually, there's a requirement that those boards be merit competency-based boards, and also there's actually a prohibition on the appointment of elected members or council officers to those boards as well. So it's at that shareholder or representative oversight level where you get that representation rather on the board itself.
Thank you. Got further questions? Oh, do you want a further question, Councillor?
Yeah, sorry, just one supplementary just from that. Are those, can I just confirm, are those merits, are they set through legislation or are they set by stakeholders? Or are they set ministerially?
I'll hand that to Craig first, and then maybe Nick can add something after.
My understanding is that would be what our shareholding forum and what's designed at that point for what's on the board. But Nick can confirm, I think, I just can't 100% remember what's in the legislation. Yeah,
there's no requirement, in fact, even for a representative body. But most councils would do that just as a practical mechanism. So there's nothing in the legislation that impacts on that. You've got complete flexibility effectively to design what you want that to look like.
Awesome. Sweet. That's the answer I was looking for. Beauty.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment to that? My understanding too is that the board of directors, let's say a hypothetical CCO, must demonstrate clearly that it's got the competencies required to govern an entity such as three water services. So it's not as plain as decisions by the shareholders forum. The shareholders forum have to respond to the question: are we appointing people that are competent to run that significant entity?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just before I go to your question, the shareholders' representation board, if we choose to have one, is made up of each of the councils as well, so that there's a combined view about what the statement of expectations and who was on the board. So I'll pass on to Councillor Rotorua Tate.
Thank you. In my reading of some of the overseas regulated authorities, there has been some quite high tension between the local voice, I suppose, being heard by the establishment of a regulatory authority, and I presume those appointments will be made similar to the state-owned enterprises. But my question also, and it goes back to some of the examples that I've read about in Scotland and the UK and others, and they were saying, or the literature suggests that it is about 15 years before we actually see the benefits of all of this. And I'm just wondering, will that be the case in New Zealand as well? I mean, they've been somewhat bigger overseas. That's a long time.
Well, I think as Nick said, Councillor Rotorua, if you look into these efficiencies potential, let's put it that way, they do have a horizon of 15 years, and after that 15 years, no more efficiencies again. The question is how soon within the 15 years you can attain that 0.75% or 1.2% and so on. So, yeah, eventually what you have, the demand and supply of the services outruns any initial efficiency margins you create.
Does that answer your question? Thank you. All right, there's no further questions, so I'll hand over to you again, Nick, to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can probably skip this slide. I think we've touched on this point already. So this just gives you an overall sort of sense of the investment profiles across each of the four districts. You can kind of see that they're quite lumpy and uneven, and that it's actually one of the reasons why a joint organisation may make sense, because a water company can smooth out the peaks and troughs across the combined portfolio of investment, rather than each council bearing its lumpy capital requirements with the ensuing impacts on rates and borrowing, so that gets smoothed out effectively over time. So if you move to the next slide, you can kind of see what that looks like on an aggregated basis. I mentioned earlier that collectively the four councils are planning to invest 1.7 billion in water infrastructure over the next 30 years. Important to understand the breakdown of that as well. So around 55% of that is renewals, which is effectively just keeping what you've got working. 26% of that is levels of service improvement, and these numbers are rough and ready, so take them with a grain of salt. But what that indicates is that there is a significant amount of investment that is required also to meet the regulatory requirements and the environmental sort of standards, and then around approximately 20% of the proposed investment is categorised towards growth or accommodating population growth. So the vast majority of that spend is effectively in one way or another non-discretionary, and that is also sort of, I guess, a key point for the water services organisation, and this is the second chart on the bottom there, is that by optimising the capital structure and achieving what we've described as modest achievable efficiencies, the water company could nevertheless generate significant cumulative capital efficiencies of around 185 million over that 30-year period. So I think the point that was made before, which is very well made, which is it takes time to achieve the benefits. Well, that is true, but these are very long-lived infrastructures, and this is a decision. The choice of a future service delivery model is a decision sort of for the long term. And what this shows is that even with a relatively sort of slow start in terms of those efficiencies and small efficiencies that kind of compound over time, nevertheless they add up to very significant amounts of money over that sort of period. And the same is true on the operating cost side. If you can move on to the next we've covered this. The next slide, please. Yeah, so this shows the sort of the day-to-day costs of running the networks. Obviously, they increase as costs increase, but also as the network sort of expanded, and you can kind of see there that profile of efficiencies which start small and start to build up over time, which is why if you only take a 10-year view around the financial implications of this decision, then you might come to a different conclusion than if you take a longer-term view. Next slide, thanks. So the scale of those operating efficiencies, even though the percentage per annum scope for efficiencies is lower on the OPEX side, the amounts in total still add up to a significant amount in the order of 180 million. So you put put OPEX and CAPEX efficiencies together, and you're looking at a combined saving of around $365 million over 30 years. And that either reduces what ratepayers pay or it gets reinvested in the infrastructure, or so some combination of the two. So then we turn to the comparative price paths. So this is, a key area of focus, and really is looking at what does all of this mean for a typical household's water bill. So these charts show the comparative price paths for each council. You'll see that for some councils in relation to in-house, there's a bit of some volatility there. We will smooth that out in our final report, but that simply reflects the numbers that we were initially provided with by each council. Under a cost to serve approach, which is where each district remains responsible for funding its costs through its revenues, then all 4 districts would benefit under the water organisation model. So the analysis suggests that, and this is based on draft analysis, but that Rotorua consumers would save an average of $215 per year, with cumulative savings of around more than $5,000 per connection over the period, or around about a 9% saving. And to a greater or lesser extent, there are sort of similar benefits for the other customers in the other 3 districts as well.
Nick, just before you go forward, I know that this is a cost to serve basis that we've done this on, and there's some information, I believe, on the harmonisation model that is in the pack that the council has received. What does that look like for the districts if we use a harmonisation approach to pricing?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'd say is that it does depend on how you choose to allocate the efficiency benefits across the councils. But if you simply allocate, the benefits of those efficiencies on the basis of each district's share of expenditure, then what that would suggest is that I think it's 3 of the councils would benefit, but it would be a slight disadvantage to Rotorua residents under that particular harmonisation scenario. But cost to serve is that's why we've presented cost to serve as the principal basis in the report, and it's also where most of the multi-council water services organisations have started as well in terms of their assumptions.
Thank you. And I note that some of the councils or the water authorities that have been formed have got a point in time where they're going to review that with the potential to harmonise. That's a choice that they've made as part of their establishment. Do you think that this might become a requirement of water authorities under the regulatory regime that could come forward, or is it hard to comment?
I'm not sure that it will necessarily. I think the Commerce Commission's principal interest here is in that there's sufficient revenue collected in aggregate, and also that they do have an interest in the efficiency with which services are provided, but so far have indicated, and they've said this publicly as well, that they're not inclined to get into the sort of the distributional issues around pricing. They see that as the responsibility of the boards operating under whatever constraints that shareholders set. And as you note, in a number of cases, the principle of cost to serve has been enshrined, for example, in the shareholders agreement that councils sort of enter into, and in some cases that's been for a certain period, and that might be a shorter or a longer period. And I guess what I would observe around the country is that has been one important factor that has assisted groups of councils to come together and actually reach agreement to proceed with these sorts of models. So that's probably the comment I'd make there.
Thank you. And a further question from Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Just looking at some of the figures that you mentioned, 365 million cumulative over 30 years or something like that. When I did the numbers, it worked out to around about 12 million per year. That's with CapEx and OpEx savings. So if that 12 million per year, is that evenly spread amongst the 4 councils, or would that be more weighted towards Rotorua being larger? How's that weighted?
Yeah, in the modelling, we've simply done that in relation to proportionately in terms of the spending. So therefore, Rotorua is the primary beneficiary, if you like. So probably rough rule of thumb is it would get about 60% of the total benefits on that apportionment basis. So if it's operating efficiency, we've allocated that on the basis of the Rotorua or Whakatane's share of the combined operating costs. If it's capital efficiency, we've done the same in terms of the proportion of the CapEx. That's how that's been done.
Rightio, thank you. And just for confidentiality question before I ask this one, there were 4 slides that had not for distribution at the top of them. Am I allowed to ask questions based on those?
Probably not a great idea to do that at this particular time. Let's save that for later.
Okay. All right, so I know these are on the multi-council option. Was the same work done on a in-house CCO if we choose to go down that path?
We haven't done the analysis just for a Rotorua only water services CCO, because that's not within the scope of options that were agreed under the heads of agreement.
Thank you. Maybe the staff might like to add some context around that, though. Is there anything you'd like to add around the work that is being done in-house at the moment that will provide councillors with information as a comparator?
Our delivery plan submission to the minister back in August last year has only plotted 2 possible options. One is a multi-TLA CCO or stay in-house as a business unit. The delivery plan has not touched base on actually the Rotorua setting CCO. I think if the council stays in-house eventually, you may decide to set it up as a CCO, but it's not within the scope of our submission to the minister at this point in time.
My mistake, sorry, I was meaning that.
Okay.
So if we retain it as an in-house business unit, have we done the same modelling?
Well,
yeah.
Go, Nick.
So the savings that we are talking about are with reference to in-house delivery. That's the sort of the comparative benchmark. So that modelling's been done for both the combined water company option and in-house separately for each council.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions, so I'll let you move on, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's just one further slide, which is, there's always questions around, how confident can we be in the efficiency assumptions? We've obviously, what I would say is that we have deliberately tried to adopt conservative assumptions based on the available evidence. But we've also we've shown that the sensitivity testing to what if they were lower or what if they're higher, just to give you a sense of how much they vary by under those different scenarios. So even under relatively small, very low kind of annual efficiencies, because of that compounding effect, you still get pretty significant benefits over time. So that in other words, in our view, the savings case is robust.
Thank you.
In terms of bringing that together, the 30-year assessment, financial assessment, tells us 3 things really. First, scale of investment required, $1.7 billion over 30 years. very significant for a sub-region of this size. Going it alone means each council bears its own program, peaks and troughs, with limited capacity to achieve those efficiencies of scale. Second, a water company obviously could potentially deliver, based on this modelling, combined savings of around 365 million, which translates into either lower costs for households or greater investment, depending on what choices are made there. Ultimately, this is demonstrating both affordability and investment resilience benefit potential from the combined water model. That brings me to the end of this presentation.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any questions, councillors, at this point? No, I think you've covered everything off really well. Craig, have you got any further slides that you'd like to present now?
I've got a couple that are sitting on the end, just based around the comms, which I just thought I'd give a quick update to. But probably just to give councillors a little bit of a summary, and if Andrew wants to add anything, is that as we move through in the timeline earlier, that we're still going to come back with some further workshops, and we'll also be updating, I think in the infrastructure committee meeting not too soon, there'll be another further update, which I don't know if it'll catch the June meeting that we're going to for the working group. So we're just trying to work out the juggling at the moment to try and get you as quicker updates as possible after those workshops like we've done today, to try and bring you up to speed, because then we'll start heading into more decision-making thinking and the consultation thinking. So that's probably just what I wanted to flag. But if there's no questions, I can just run through a couple of those comm slides, or Andrew. Yeah.
Oh, we just wondered if we want to say thank you to Nick, and we can, if there are no other questions for Nick, and then we can.
Councillors, any further questions for Nick before we think? No, thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate your time this morning and presenting the information and answering our questions. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, I think maybe this will come through in your slides, Craig, but the things that I'm really interested in council being up to speed on and having kind of general comfort around is iwi engagement for us, because that's critical, and we will likely be taking a slightly different approach to other councils because of the uniqueness of our situation. And then the second one, as the largest council, there is we need to do a bit of thinking around our position on what the shareholding representation and voting rights might be, because obviously for the other councils might be quite straightforward to support, each council gets equal voting rights, because that might be more suitable for them. For us, I think it's a bit different, and so I'd be keen to break that conversation out and bring that to you soon. So those are the two that coming up soon that I just want to signal to you are ones that are top of my mind in terms of working this through.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Timera Benfell.
So is that just a question for the CE? Is that more sort of like a population-based weighting system, or what is it? What might that look like?
I don't know. Is that slide coming, or is?
No, we haven't got those.
Okay.
Haven't got those slides in the pack today, but they've got the pre-reading that was Tuesday.
So in the slides, there's I think there's 250 roughly slides over those two decks, but somewhere in there is a slide that talks about 4 different models. From memory, one is equal share among all 4, so 25% each. I believe one is asset value of what you contribute. There's another one that might be number of connections, and then is there another one got population? So from memory, those are the 4, and 3 of them roughly put Rotorua over 60% of the shareholding. So obviously there is some discussion to be done around that. At the last working group, the working group asked the CEs and the project team to go away and do some work on what potentially some blended models are. So, what that might look like is maybe 25% of the shares are divided evenly, one quarter for each council, but 75% are divided a different way. And that reflects both some emphasis of the councils collectively, if that's what the councils collectively want to do, represent some everyone's equal, and some, well, your communities have put in more investment or are putting in more investment or have more people or have more connections, and therefore that's represented differently. So it's a really finely balanced and highly subjective matter. So unlike a lot of the work that Nick and his team have done, which are around turning the handle, this is bespoke. Every CCO will grapple with this themselves, multi-council CCO, and will come up with a slightly different formula. So important for us to do that as well.
Thank you for that background. And the slide set in your stellar is around ownership and representation, gives you the various options that you can have a look at in consideration. Councillor Maxwell's got a question.
The question is, thank you, Mr. CE, for just what you just said, because it's on the back of my mind, and that representation and the way it's going to be built. And I'm glad you said that. Is that going to come back to us, or will it be left with the working party to work through how we feel? Or, yeah.
If I can, through you, Chair. Yes, it will. I'm just sitting here now thinking how we're going to break down each of those complex subjects into some workshops across the next little while. I suppose the format is the working group is chewing it over now, and then they'll go somewhere with it, and then once we've got that, we'll be in a clear position to talk about where they landed. But what you've got there is the reading that they've got, so you're up to date with where they're reading. We're just not up to date with where they're thinking at that point, because they're still in that conversation right now. But as Andrew articulated, there's a whole lot of options that are being used, and we'll come back to the working group in June with some of those scenarios, and then that's when we'll come back to you guys. But there definitely needs to be a couple more workshops, I think, on some of those nitty-gritty bits. Yeah.
But can I add something to that? I think from our perspective as officers and in participating in this process, you can work out of the pros and cons of joining together to do something, and you saw the numbers and you see the potential efficiencies and so on. And that's, you may choose to accept them all, or you might choose to have some skepticism behind that. Doesn't matter. The next phase has to be, if there is a regional, combined CCO, what are the governance structures behind that? And I think that what Craig says, that the elected members and the working group have to turn their mind to the various possible models around that, because basically the numbers have to be done now. So it's going to be mostly focused around governance, participation, influencing, and things like that. So I think that's where the effort will be concentrated over the next couple of months, with the workshops with elected members, obviously, to explore different possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. And further questions? At the moment, we're in public. Is there a further question that you had? No. We'll move on. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. I'll let Craig move on with the last few slides, and then we can take further questions at the end.
Thank you. Look, some of it's just a quick reinforcement of what we've talked about a bit earlier in the morning, I think, with some of the questions around the integrated comms approach across the councils, but also what's happening. This slide here was created by our comms team across the 4 councils, which just shows the framework of which they're operating. I think we have seen this before. I think we might have seen it in the infrastructure committee. But it just shows there is some purpose to what they're doing, I think is the most important thing. There's some deliberate acts that are going on to just keep this subject out there. But it's has been not just drifting along. Again, that's when we talked about the regional versus council specific, so that slide just clears that up and talks about it each specifically. And I always, we've got two things that happen across some of these organisations. Some of them have comms and engagement people within the same team, because they're the same people in small councils, whereas we're lucky enough here to have some resources that are different. So with Michelle's team, and I don't know if everyone's seen Te Rangi Māori before. She's working with us and specifically in engagement in the iwi space here. So Te Rangi Māori Williams, who's we're very lucky to have supporting us with this work. So she's about to connect with quite a lot of our partners and stakeholders in that iwi discussion. Michelle, do you want to outline the actual depth of that engagement from your plan? I know Councillor Barker said she'd circulate it to the councillors, but I don't have it on a slide. Yeah.
No, that's good to play through you, Madam Chair. I think, so like I spoke of earlier with the complexities of what we're dealing with here with joint consent holders, our wastewater treatment plants being on Māori-owned land or co-owned land, that's where our first point of call needs to start. So because they're integral to our decision in terms of movement. I don't understand the legislation quite as much, but what are the implications for us if those joint consent holders say we don't want to transfer our consents to a CCO? So those are sort of the things we're looking at in terms of engagement. And then we will then look at those iwi with treaty obligations that we're subject to. So, for example, Te Marua Kaituna, Te Rotorua Lakes Trust. So it's sort of a tiered approach. We go to those ones who we have direct partnerships with right now and legal obligations that actually allow us to run our water or take our discharge, and then we move on to understanding from those iwi entities what some of their thoughts are and feedback in regards to this moving out of council, who they're used to dealing with, to a CCO. So that's sort of how we've structured it at a high level, but it's subject to change. So because the timeline's so short, Te Rangi Māori is supporting, but we're using our current protocols and hui with iwi to just sort of table an overview of the project, and then we'll get into some deeper kōrero, but first off the rank is definitely those joint consent holders and Pukeroa Whata and Haumingi, where Rotorua Teas, wastewater treatment plant is. So yeah, that's where we're starting.
Thanks, Michelle. Is there anything further you want to add to that, Craig?
I was just going to add, as an update to everyone, at Tuesday's Waters Working Group in Whakatane, we had a delegation of iwi chairs representative of the Eastern Bay of Plenty, minus a couple who weren't at the table. So I think Te Whānau Apanui wasn't represented, nor was Ngāi Tuhui. Were not represented at the table, but they were in support, where they came and talked directly to the working group about how they could be involved in the future with the working group. And I know that was a discussion there, and essentially everyone's going away to work out how that could happen, because there was a representative, and I think Andrew and Karen might want to elaborate the position that we put across at that meeting to just where we are right now, which supports where Michelle is.
Thank you for highlighting that, what occurred in the working group. I might just pass to the CE first.
Thank you very much. Look, as I mentioned earlier in my initial comments, it's a key consideration for me in terms of, as Michelle highlighted, we've got some really deep and bespoke arrangements here that are critical to delivering water services, and not just they're not just optional. And so what I highlighted there was our context is quite different from a number of those Eastern Bay councils, both from the complexity and essential nature of our relationships, not to say that others are not, but also by the sheer number that we have, 31 PSGs in Arohi, with expectations that they will work with council directly rather than through a representative group and on the working group. And her worship also was pretty clear that we needed to be respectful to those commitments and relationships, and in that short space of time, we didn't commit to the working group that would be our method of engagement. Our methods would be respectful of the commitments and agreements we already have in place. Having said that, we're still going to explore whether through that engagement process we are getting a message that that type of forum might help. And so we'll just keep you informed as those discussions go forward. We have an iwi Chairs Hui on Monday, which is primarily focused at simplifying local government, but working through with the team to see whether that agenda has space for a short update on this. Because again, we have all those right people in the room, so it might be good to use it. I think, have I covered roughly what was discussed?
Yeah, I think that fairly covers it off really well. Thank you. Yeah. No, I'll hand it back to you, Craig, unless there's any questions from the councillors, which there appears to be none.
Thank you very much. It's all from me. We'll be in touch about when the next workshop will be following the working groups to take us through the next stage. Yeah.
Magic. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the staff who are here today to help support this piece of work, which is a massive undertaking and is ongoing all the time. And I just would like to ask that we close off our proceedings with a karakia and invite Councillor Timera Benefell, please, to do so.
Kia ora tātou, anei tō tātou karakia whakakapi. Kia iri tātou. Kia tau te rani mari e ki runa ki tēnā o tātou, kia mahia te hua mā ki kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūtu rofi te whakamaua, kia tīna haumie hui e, whai hi e.
Thank you very much, Councillor Timera Benefell.